And we are live in a living color from Scimitar Studios in Denville, New Jersey. Welcome aboard, everybody, to the Open Mic program right here on Blog Talk Radio and, of course, on YouTube as well on the Sports Talk Nation. Folks, glad to have you join us today as we have a great show today. We are going to talk about the AL Central and specifically a very red-hot team in the AL Central, and that is the Kansas City Royals, who right now find themselves at 500 and in the thick of what is a tremendous race in the AL Central right now, as we are about a little over 2 weeks away from the All-Star break, for that matter. And when we get to this point in the year, you know, if you're a big baseball fan, you know what this time of the year is like. You get to you're approaching the halfway point of the year. You're starting to see where your team is, and you kind of get a feel of what your team can do. Are they going to be a buyer or a seller at the All-Star break, or certainly by the 31st of July, and whether they're going to be able to compete. And in the Central, it's really a three-horse race between Kansas City, Minnesota, and Cleveland, and it's going to be a lot of fun to see who can survive that and maybe even get into the wild card, because the wild card in the AL is very wide open as well. Joining us today to talk about the Kansas City Royals is Max Rieper of Royals Review. Max has joined us many times in the past to talk about Kansas City. We had him a couple months ago to preview the season, and now he's back with us here today. So, Max, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. I'm just glad to be in this position of talking about the Royals as contenders instead of talking about how they're about to trade everyone off. I thought that's the kind of conversation we'd be having a month ago, but certainly would prefer this.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the way this team's playing, it's amazing. It's almost like two different seasons in a lot of ways, Max. I mean, you mentioned it just a second ago. A little over a month ago, this team was really struggling. May 7th, they were 10 games under 500, and for them to be basically just a reverse 10 games over 500 since that point and be in this position, I mean, you couldn't ask for anything more if you're a Royals fan right now.
Yeah, and I think I'd be lying if I said I predicted this too. I mean, I think a lot of Royals fans had pretty much given up on the season, and for good reason. I mean, I think as late as May 31st, I think they had the worst record in the American League, and and since then they've just kind of caught fire and have worked their way back into this pennant race. But at some point, we got to stop being surprised that the Royals come back like this, because they've done it so many times over the last couple of years. I actually looked as to how many hot months teams have had, defined as like playing 600 ball in a month, and no team in baseball has had more months where they won 60% of the games than the Royals over the last 4 seasons. So they're a team that's kind of prone to this kind of hot streak. I think when you just stumble off to such a poor start. And they went 7-16 in April. I think that just really dampened a lot of expectations. But these are guys that have a track record. I mean, we know Eric Hosmer. He hit 185 in April. We know he's not that kind of hitter. We know that Mike Moustakas and Lorenzo Cain are capable of kind of carrying this team. And we've gotten some pleasant surprise from young guys like Jorge Bonifacio and Whit Merrifield, who've been really offensive spark plugs for this team. So it just kind of shows, I think, some of this is, this team knows they can come back from deficits because they've done it so many times, and they have kind of a belief in themselves and believe in each other. And I think that actually, I'm not big on clubhouse chemistry, but certainly I think, not giving up and not quitting on your team, I think that helps. And in this instance, I think the fact they've been through so many tough times before really helped them out and helped them overcome what was a huge deficit.
It really was. And, when you bring up the fact that this team's been here before and you brought up that great stat of the team playing so many months over 600 on a winning percentage, it takes me back, and I think back to that wild card game, and I know it's been a few years now, but I think back to that wild card game that they played against the Oakland A's, where they came back, had that wild game and won that, and that really kind of jump-started their playoff run and their World Series run for 2 years running. This is a team that's been through so much, as you just illustrated, and they have so many veteran guys, so many guys who have been to the World Series, so many guys who have seen a lot of winning there in the last couple of years. It's hard not to sit there and think, as this team sits right now, a couple games back of Minnesota for first place, that if this continues going through the All-Star break, past the All-Star break, and we're sitting here July 31st, that there's a very good chance this team, instead of trading these pieces, like guys who have contract years like Eric Hosmer, instead of trading those guys, they may go out there and add some pitching, and if they do, they're going to be a very scary. They're a scary team as it is. They'll be even scarier if they actually get some pitching going past the All-Star break.
Yeah, I think that's kind of surprising too. Like seeing the discussion a couple of weeks ago was, what can we get for these players? And I think, even if they do kind of fade in July a little bit, I just don't see them being sellers at this point just because Dayton Moore is so loyal to this team. He believes in this team, and he knows that they're capable of these hot streaks, and he's seen it now in the month of June. So I think even if they fall behind the Indians by, more than a few games, I think Dayton Moore is going to give this team, this core team, every opportunity to kind of make the playoffs. And so he's not going to break this team up. I think he's got a lot of loyalty to Eric Hosmer. He drafted him back in 2008. He drafted Mike Moustakas back in 2007. He's kind of seen these guys since the beginning of their professional careers, and I think he's going to have a lot of loyalty to them and see it through. As for being buyers at the deadline, that'll be interesting because they don't really have a deep farm system. When they were buyers in 2015 and they got Johnny Cueto and Ben Zobrist at the trade deadline, two, very savvy deals that end up really helping them out in October. They had a pretty good farm system at that point. They ended up trading 4 pitchers to get those 2 players. Now they're not quite in the same position. They've traded a lot of their the promising prospects. They have had some poor drafts that haven't really replenished the farm system. So they're kind of stuck in a position where if they do want to be buyers this July, and number one, they're kind of up against the max payroll they can really afford to have. But number two, they just don't have any tradable assets that other teams are going to want. Now, they can be creative, maybe Jorge Soler, who they acquired from Wade Davis last year, and he's been kind of a disappointment. Maybe he gets put on the shopping block. Maybe there's a team out there that believes in him. That's possible. But they may have to just kind of settle for making some moves at the periphery, maybe a minor trade to get a reliever or a bench bat or someone like that. So, but it's a much different dynamic than we were talking about a couple of weeks ago when we thought everyone was going to get traded away. And now I'd be very surprised at this point if Dayton Moore trades any of his veterans away for prospects.
And it'll be very interesting. I mean, it's a really tough spot to be in if you're a general manager when you are, you got these salaries that are coming off the books at the end of the year, and you're trying to build for the future. At the same time, you got a team that still can go out there and win a World Series. So it's really such a tricky line to toe if you're a Dayton Moore right now.
Yeah, and he's had a difficult time with that, I think, over the last year. So going into this off season, I think he had a similar predicament. Like, hey, should I break up this team and really start the rebuilding movement? Or do I try to go all in and win one more championship in 2017? And he kind of tried to thread the needle. I think that's why you saw him trade Wade Davis for a young guy like Jorge Soler, who wasn't a prospect anymore, but he's also not really a proven player at this point. That's also why they went out and traded Rod Dyson for Nate Carnes, who's a younger pitcher, but he's not a prospect by any stretch. So and that strategy hasn't really served them that well this year because they could probably use a Wade Davis and a Rod Dyson right now, whereas Nate Carnes and Jorge Soler haven't really contributed much this year. So, they'll go into this July, with that same kind of mindset, and you kind of hope either they'll be good enough that they can go all in and be buyers, or they'll be bad enough that they can go all out and be sellers. The worst possible scenario seems to be if they're just kind of okay, mediocre, and they're not really buyers, but they're not really sellers, and then they don't know what to do. And then they end up not making the playoffs, and they end up not getting prospects for their players, and then you're kind of left out of an opportunity there. That's kind of the worst case scenario. Now they do have a fallback in that if Kane and Moustakas and Hosmer leave, they could get some draft pick compensation for them, even with the new labor deal. They could still get a pick at the end of the first round if they make a qualifying offer and the player gets a $50 million contract on the open market. So we'll have to see if that happens. But certainly you'd rather get prospects than draft picks. But, if they're in it, I think you got to take a shot at it. And if you pass up getting prospects, then so be it, because ultimately you're out there to win championships, not just build up a farm system. So, Dayton Moore, he's not in an enviable task at all. He's got a challenge ahead of him this July.
He really does, and it's a great position to be in a lot of ways too. And you brought up the one piece that is out there on this team that has really caught some fire over the last couple of weeks, as far as just rumors were concerned, was Hosmer. There was a rumor, I think it was like 2 weeks ago. There was a rumor before Kansas City got back to 500 that the Yankees were calling and inquiring about his services because they have all these issues at first base. I'm sure those kind of calls will continue, even though Kansas City's right now in the thick of this. And I'm sure the answer is going to be absolutely not. They're not going to trade away Eric Hosmer at this point. But it's going to be interesting to see what they want to do with that with him, because he's probably the guy that could fetch the most prospects, you would think, being such a valuable piece. But at the same time, he's such a emotional leader in that clubhouse. Do you really want to take him off of that when you have a team that could be in the middle of a pennant race, at least for the division title?
Yeah, I think my opinion is that even if they were sellers and they were trading guys away, I think they would be really reluctant to deal Hosmer anyway, just because I think he's like a club favorite. Like, I think General Manager Dayton Moore is really believes in him as a cornerstone. I don't think they've totally dismissed the possibility of re-signing him. And I know there's been a lot of talk about what a big contract he could get this offseason. But I think the Royals are going to at least make an offer, and we'll see how competitive they can be. But I don't. If they were out of it, if they're completely out of it, I still don't think they're going to trade him. And then there's also how many teams need a first baseman that are contenders? Maybe the Yankees, but there aren't a whole lot of other teams. A lot of the other teams that are in contention, they're contending because their first baseman is really playing well. So it's kind of hard to find a good matchup for first baseman. I think if they had been sellers, I think Lorenzo Cain would have been a guy that could have fetched a lot, because a lot of teams can use outfielders and he can plug in anywhere, as well as Jason Vargas, since he's a pitcher, and pitchers always seem to be in high demand. But now that they're in it, I don't think there's a chance that they trade any of those guys. It'll be interesting to see with Hosmer. He's a guy that there's a wide kind of gulf in opinions on. I think there's a lot of people that are more into stats that don't see him as being a very valuable player. And you look at his stats, and they don't really compare to a lot of other players out there. And then there are people that kind of see the intangibles, the defense, and his leadership and his clutch hitting ability, and think he's worth more than maybe the stats show. So it'll be interesting to see what teams buy into and who gives him the kind of deal that maybe he's looking for, because he's looking for superstar money, and honestly, he hasn't really put up superstar numbers. But he's still a young guy, and he's got a pretty good resume. So I'm sure he's got Scott Boras as an agent. I'm sure Scott will do a fine job selling Eric Hosmer to teams this winter.
Oh, I'm sure he will, and you can see that he's probably going to be someone's going to command $100+ million contract. I don't know how high that's going to go. I certainly don't see $150 million. I think that it's something I don't think teams are going to go that range, but I think maybe $100 million, $105 million. I could see that for Eric Hosmer at first base, but we'll see who is willing to be on that kind of market for him. And we all know Scott Boras likes to jack up the price because he knows a lot of times he's just competing against himself most of the time.
Yeah, and there are quite a few teams I think that will be looking for first baseman this winter. I mean, possibly the Yankees if maybe they're not going to be patient with Greg Bird. I mean, I think Red Sox. I think Mitch Moreland's on a 1-year deal, so they could have an opening there. The Phillies, if they decide they want to start being more of a contender, so there'll be a market out there for first baseman. I'm just curious to see what he goes for out in the open market, just because there are teams that are more stat oriented now that are going to look at his wins above replacement and say, well, he's not a very good first baseman. And there's teams that are going to say, well, there's you're not looking at his defense, you're not looking at his clutch hitting, and maybe he can hit for more power if he's in our stadium instead of Kauffman Stadium. So yeah, he's going to be an attractive guy, I think, to someone.
Taking a look at what the Royals have done here, looking at the stats here for the month, and this team's hitting at 273 as a unit offensively this month. They hit 210 in the month of April, and that just goes back to what we talked about about the slow start of the season. I mean, you have Salvador Perez, who's just been tearing the cover with the ball. He's hitting 362 right now. He's got an OPS over 1,000. Lorenzo Cain already has 8 home runs. Not a guy you would think would be a home run guy, but Lorenzo Cain is jacking the ball out of the ballpark right now with the 8 dingers. Moustakas, of course, with the 6 home runs. And how about this guy overall, this young player, Whit Merrifield? I know we talked about him in spring training, getting his first real opportunity, full-time opportunity at second base. He has really been a really solid addition to this team on a full-time basis at second base, and really has played well. 17 RBIs this month alone.
Yeah, and second base has really been a problem for the Royals for a number of years. Even when they were winning pennants, they had Omar Infante out there, and he was really didn't live up to his contract. So it's nice to get some stability there at second. And it's kind of crazy to think Merrifield didn't even make the team out of spring training. They actually decided to go with young rookie Raul Mondesi to start the year, and he was just overwhelmed. And that's part of why they didn't play very well in April because their offense was just terrible. And it wasn't all Mondesi. There's a lot of guys not hitting back then, but he was just overwhelmed, I think, at second base. And so they called up Whit Merrifield and gave him another shot. He had some playing time with the team last year and played well in spurts, but was a little inconsistent. And yeah, he's just been a spark plug for this team. I mean, he's a nice player in that he makes a lot of contact, doesn't strike out much, puts the ball in play. He's got good wheels, runs the bases well, plays very solid defense. And he's also very versatile in the field. He's played mostly second base, but you can put him in the outfield. You can put him at shortstop. You can put him at third. And he's been hitting at the top of the lineup, which is another area where they've really needed someone because they were batting Alcides Escobar at the top of the lineup, who he was leading off of the team when they were winning the World Series, but he's got such a poor on base percentage. He's not really helping your offense much, and he's been really hurting with the offense this year. So. Yeah, Merrifield's been a nice find at the top of the lineup. Lorenzo Cain is another guy that is been a huge factor in June. I mean, I wrote an article in May saying what happened to his power. He only has like one home run to this point of the season. He didn't hit for much power at the end of last year because he had a wrist injury. So I was concerned that maybe the wrist injury was lingering and he wasn't going to hit for much power anymore. And of course, in June, all he does is hit 8 home runs, just a torrid pace. So it's nice to see him starting to hit. And then Mike Moustakas, I think we're seeing him kind of raise his performance to another level. And he's got a real shot at breaking the franchise single-season home run record, which is kind of an embarrassingly low 36 set by Steve Balboni in 1985. I think he's already up to 18, and we're coming up 19. On the halfway point of the season. So 19, that's right, yeah. So, he's on pace to break the record, and he's also a free agent. I'm kind of interested in seeing what he gets on the open market because, not only is he a tremendous power hitter, but he's a great defender at third base. And I was looking at the list of free agent third basemen this year. It's like him and Escobar are the only real solid third baseman out there. So there's, if you're looking for a third baseman, he's going to be the guy. And so, he's another guy that could command quite a bit on the open market. But a very solid season for him so far. And those are really the guys that are kind of carrying this team.
And I like Moustakas, too, because he's a fiery guy, and that's the kind of guy you want in the clubhouse. He's one of those guys that, if you're the opposing team, you're like, man, I can't stand this guy because he's just got too much fire in him, but you love this guy in your clubhouse. But, it's nice to see him.
Yeah, he's a guy, when they...
Success. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, when they were down in the ALDS to Houston in the game 4, was it? He's the one that gave the inspirational speech that kind of spurred their comeback. So, yeah, you're absolutely right about him being a great clubhouse guy.
Oh, man, he's great. I mean, that's what this decision is going to be so great. And I know I keep going back to that, but that's why this decision is going to be so important for them later on this year between these two guys, between Hosmer and Moustakas, because these are two big leaders in the clubhouse. But, as far as what he's been able to do this year, I mean, remember last year when he went, obviously remember last year when he went down early in the season, was lost for the year. It was just such a gaping hole in the middle of the lineup. To have him back in the lineup now and providing this kind of pop is huge for this Royals team. And now 19 home runs this year. Everyone's hitting the baseball out of the ballpark this year. It's kind of a strange season. A lot of people think the ball's too tight, whatever that means. But he is well on his way to hitting. I would venture to guess probably around 45 home runs. Maybe that's being. I think that's probably about right, 19 home runs now at this point in the year, probably around 40 home runs. So, I mean, that's going to obliterate the record that you brought up just a second ago.
Yeah, and really he's been hitting for power ever since he kind of changed his approach in 2015. People forget, up to about 2014, he was kind of a bust as a player. I mean, he wasn't really living up to his first-round draft status. And then 2015, he kind of said, you know what? I keep facing these radical shifts on defense, and they're leaving the left side of the field wide open. Maybe I need to retool my swing and start hitting it to the left side a little bit more. So he started doing that, and lo and behold, he started hitting for power as well, and just had a great breakout season in 2015. 2016, he kind of carried that over, but you're right, he got hurt early on, and so we never got to see what he could do then. And then this year, he's actually going back to pulling the ball, but yet he's just pulling the ball into the right field bleachers, and so it doesn't matter if you're hitting the ball into the stands as far as shifts. So, yeah, it's been interesting. The Royals, I think, kind of recognize that the ball is leaving ballparks more often this year because they kind of stressed adding power to the lineup this past offseason. And they've had one of they're on pace to set the franchise record for home runs in a season, which I imagine a few teams might be doing this year. But yeah, it's kind of been a shift in strategies for them. In 2014 when they went to the World Series, they were dead last in the league in home runs. Just a pitiful total that year. But they won games through just kind of slapping the ball, stealing bases, playing great defense, and having a great bullpen. Well, they don't have a great bullpen anymore. Their defense is still pretty good, but it's not as great as it was. So they're going to have to win games differently. And I think one way is hitting the ball out of the ballpark, which is so far has helped them pretty, especially in the month of June.
It has. I mean, that's just the way a lot of these teams are right now built in a lot of ways, because everyone's hitting the ball out of the ballpark. I mean, I don't even know what to make of that. I mean, right now, as far as the amount of home runs we've seen in Major League Baseball so far this year, a lot of people have brought up the idea that the ball is just tighter. A lot of people have brought up the fact that, a lot of these ballparks in a lot of ways are just built smaller. You take a look at Atlanta, kind of a smaller ballpark, but I really don't know what to make of it. I don't want to say the infamous S word that has, crippled baseball for that matter over the last decade or decade plus, but it's just it's a unique situation that I don't think we have seen certainly in some time now, certainly since the steroid era came to an end about 5-6 years ago. But I really don't know what to make of what's going on with the home runs, other than maybe it is just the balls are juiced up somehow.
Yeah, I don't know if you're old enough to remember in 1987 where it seemed like everyone hit 30 home runs that year, and that was a huge spike. It seemed like Mark McGwire hit 49 as a rookie, and there were accusations of a juiced ball back then, and I don't know if they ever discovered what caused that, because I think the home runs went back down the next year. But yeah, it's really interesting. I think I'm sure people are doing analysis on the balls to see if there's any difference. And I don't know if it's that. I know there's some players are putting more of an emphasis on launch angle now that we know more about kind of the we have all the StatCast data and how guys barrel up on the ball and the launch angle and how it relates to home runs. So maybe guys are maybe better at knowing how to hit home runs. That could be part of it. So certainly the ballparks have something to do with it, but we've seen balls leave Kauffman Stadium at a greater rate than they've been before, and we haven't moved the fences in. And it's a pretty big ballpark that's hard to hit home runs historically. So yeah, I don't know what it is. If it's juiced balls, I don't know if it's something that's being intentionally done or if it's just the supplier is doing something different to the balls. But yeah, certainly we have a lot of data now. We should be able to figure this out. But I don't know if it's something that MLB's trying to hide or they don't want to admit to, or we'll never be able to figure out the mystery. But yeah, it's been kind of weird to see, and yeah, I don't know if I like home runs being so plentiful that they almost become mundane. Because something I like when home runs are kind of special, and you don't see them. In the steroid era, I think they got a little too crazy, and it wasn't special to see a guy hit 50, 60, 70 home runs. So
yeah, I agree with you, and it's something that I hope. I mean, the way we're going right now, Aaron Judge is going to hit over 60 home runs. You got a number of guys that are going to hit over 40 home runs this year. So I really don't know where we're going as far as the home runs are concerned. I think maybe you take a look at pitchers, the way they're throwing the baseball right now, throwing much, much harder. Maybe that has something to do with it. I'm not sure. It could be a part of it as well. But it's an era where there's a lot more offense. You see a lot more guys hitting 320, 330 now. So guys are getting a better look at the baseball than they have in years past. Maybe it's more open stances. I'm not sure. It could be a number of things.
And more strikeouts too. I mean, guys are kind of selling out to hit home runs, and so I don't know if that's part of it as well. And then maybe there needs to be more tinkering with kind of the strike zone or rules of the game, because I think home runs are exciting and strikeouts are exciting, but ultimately I think you want more contact in the sport, because strikeouts, strikeouts means nothing's happening really. There's no action on the field. I think what you want to do is facilitate action on the field, get contact, make defenders make plays. Like they say in Bull Durham, strikeouts are fascist, ground balls are democratic. You want to get everyone involved in the play. I think it makes it a more interesting game. So I think Rob Manfred, I think that's certainly been on his list of things to do this year. So hopefully we'll see some maybe tinkering with the rules to kind of get some more equilibrium back in the sport.
This means for the home run derby, we're going to see some jack out like 30 home runs in one round of the home run derby.
And they've got that really weird machine out in Miami that celebrates home runs, so that'll be a spectacle to see.
That thing's going to be going crazy. And then, I think don't they have that gold ball that they throw out there as well for charity or something like that?
Oh yeah. So that's going to be a home run, and if they get Aaron Judge and Cody Bellinger in there, that's going to be a fun one to watch.
That is going to be a fun one to watch. Just back on the Royals pitch. Let's go to the Royals pitching, because the pitching's been kind of a mixed bag this year. The good, we'll start there. Jason Vargas has been fantastic this year. He's very likely going to get an All-Star appearance. 11 wins this year to just 3 losses. He has been incredibly consistent for pretty much much of the year. He's good right now for like 6 innings, giving up 2-3 runs. So it's a quality start almost every single time out. What has he done that has really kind of turned things around from what you've seen from him this year? They really haven't seen from Jason Vargas, because when you think of Jason Vargas, you think of a guy who's a good 4 or 5 starter, a guy who's not going to hurt you. He'll give you some 5 quality innings, and that's about it. But this year, it's just a totally different guy.
Yeah, and he was kind of written off, and we didn't really have any expectations for him going into this year, because this is going to be his first full season since he had Tommy John surgery back in 2015. And so, yeah, he was kind of an afterthought. He wasn't part of that World Series team. He only made a couple starts last year after coming back from the surgery. So, yeah, we didn't have any expectations for him, and he's just been fantastic this year. And they really needed it, too, especially with Danny Duffy being out for a month, the tragic loss of Yordan Ventura. There was quite a gap there in the starting rotation, and he's filled that very admirably. And it's really remarkable, too, in this age of, like, heat and fastballs, 100-mile-per-hour fastballs. He throws 86 miles an hour, and he gets guys out. He befuddles guys with great location and one of the best changeups in the league. And he's been throwing his changeup, I think, more than almost any other starter in baseball, and he's getting just great swing and miss stuff with it. So, it's been a great turnaround for him. I think he's going to be in the running for comeback player of the year this year if he keeps it up, and an all-star appearance as well. He could possibly even start the All-Star game. He leads the league in wins right now, and he's an ERA in the low 2s. So, it's been a remarkable season. And he's also an impending free agent, too. I don't think there's much expectation that they'll bring him back next year. But it's nice to see him kind of go out on a high note. He's been a great teammate, great player on this team, pitched in the 2014 World Series. So I'm really happy for him, and I hope he can continue it, because they really need that starting pitching, especially with Duffy out.
As for right now, he is right now the centerpiece of this rotation, and they're going to roll with it.
Yeah, and I think everyone was expecting Danny Duffy to be that guy, and Duffy's pitched well, but of course he's been out the last couple of weeks. They're expecting him to get him back around the All-Star break, so that's pretty encouraging. But to have them 1-2 at the top of the rotation is really going to be important. If they do become buyers at the deadline, I think one thing they could use is probably another starting pitcher. Nate Carnes has been hurt for about a month, and I don't think they expect him back anytime soon. He's had a lot of injuries in his past. So they've been throwing out a lot of rookies out there, like Eric Skoglund and Jake Junis, who have been okay, but have been pretty inconsistent. I don't think they're guys you can exactly count on. Matt Strahm is a rookie who they put in the rotation, he's probably their top prospect at this point. He's pretty good. I like his stuff, but he's not a guy that you can expect, I think, a whole lot from, and I think they may want to limit his innings too as the year wears on. So they're probably going to need some starting pitching help at some point this year if they want to stay in contention. You look at Cleveland's rotation, and they've got starting pitching out the wazoo. So to really match them, I think they're going to have to get at least one starting pitcher. And like I said, they don't have a lot of tradable assets, so it's not going to be like some great pitcher out there that is available. Certainly not a Jose Quintana or anyone like that that's available, Sonny Gray or anyone like that. They're probably going to have to get someone who's just another number 4 starter. But someone that can at least fill out the rotation that gives them more consistency than some of these rookies. That would help a lot. But yeah, Vargas and Duffy have been
it's going to be
great.
A tough market to find some good to find that number 3 or 4 starter. There's so many teams right now that are very mediocre, around 500 or under 500. You take a look at the NL. A lot of teams have underachieved this year. So, pitching will be at a premium, certainly on the market. And if a team were able to go out there and try to get a substantial pitcher like a number 2, or even a number 1 for that matter, the asking price is going to be astronomical. So it'll be tough. It'll be a tough market, I think, for starting pitching this year.
And it seems like it always is too. I mean, teams always need more pitching, and especially. I mean, wait in the next month. There's going to be another couple pitchers that get hurt, and teams will need to fill those holes. So yeah, I expect it to be a pretty tight market for pitching, and I don't expect the Royals to go out and get anyone great. It's going to be someone that's probably on a bad contract or someone that's maybe just been okay this year that can help fill out the rotation. But what they really need is just kind of guys to step up. It'd be nice if another rookie came up and was a nice performer and kind of gave the Royals a boost like Whit Merrifield did on offense or Roy Bonifacio did on offense. That's what they really need. But right now I don't see anyone in the minors that can really step up and do that.
Yeah. Jason Hamill has pitched better. His last 4 starts have been pretty solid. He's won 2 of those games in that stretch. He gave up a run to Houston and San Francisco each, gave a pair of runs to Boston and Toronto, so he's been pitching a little bit better over the last month now.
Yeah, and he's a guy that's kind of been inconsistent in his career, although he pitched a lot better for the Cubs last year. I guess with him, what they did was they simplified his delivery a little bit, had him work out of the stretch a little bit, which is a mechanics process that pitching coach Dave Island helped implement with Danny Duffy, and that really helped his career a lot. So they kind of used that with Hamill as well, got him to simplify his approach, and it seems to have worked so far. He's a guy that I think kind of what we're talking about, the number 4 starter. He's like kind of an ideal guy for that. He can give you some innings. Not going to be great, but he'll, usually most of the time he'll limit the opponent to 3 runs or so and can give you the innings that you need. And that's what the Royals need. They need another guy like that, really. So it's to see him kind of turn his season around after a really poor April. That's pretty encouraging for the Royals, especially with what they kind of invested in him as far as money goes. And he signed with the team for another year. So it would be nice to see him kind of continue to turn his season around and give them solid innings in that rotation.
Talking here with Max Rieper of Royals Review, which you can visit on royalsreview.com. They're part of the SB Nation. Bullpen, the big story coming into the year, of course, was this bullpen when they lost Wade Davis to the Chicago Cubs, and they give the closer's job to Kelvin Herrera, and he's done a pretty good job. 18 saves. The ERA is a little bit high at 4.5, but he has really started to settle in over his last handful of appearances. What has been your impression of what Herrera has done in that closer's role for this team this year?
Yeah, he's had some struggles just for a couple outings. I think he's had some trouble with the long ball primarily, and it seems like so last year he kind of added a slider to his repertoire, and it actually worked pretty well. I think his slider was pretty effective last year. This year, he's kind of leaving it up in the zone, and it's getting hammered. He's getting a little too cute with his changeup too. He's gotten a couple home runs hit on that, so he kind of needs to stick with his fastball. That's kind of his bread and butter. I think if he does that, he's going to have a lot more success. He has pitched a little bit better recently, but he had a couple blown saves there, or a couple outings where it wasn't a save situation, but he pitched pretty poorly, and people started questioning whether he was fit for the closer role. You got to understand, us Royals fans, we're pretty spoiled when it comes to bullpens. We had Wade Davis, who's pitching great in Chicago now. We had Greg Holland, who's pitching great in Colorado now. So we're kind of used to that shutdown bullpen. That's been, like I said, the formula for success is having that great bullpen that can just shut things down in the 7th inning. They don't really have that right now. I mean, Kelvin Herrera, I think, is kind of an average good closer, like he's about, as good as anyone else out there, not elite like Chapman or some of the other guys that are kind of at the upper stratosphere. But he's a good closer, and I think the problem right now is they don't have a lot of depth behind him. They've gotten some good innings from Joakim Soria, who was terrible last year. He's really rebounded nicely this year. They've gotten some good innings out of Mike Minor, you may remember as a starter in Atlanta. He's kind of come back from labrum surgery and kind of reinvented himself as a nice reliever. So they've got those 2 good options. Peter Moylan, who's 38, he's been an okay option from the right side, although he had a couple outings that blew up his ERA. But they really need a couple more bullpen arms out there. So, like I said, that's another area where they could probably add someone if they had the resources to do that. Because like I said, their formula has been shutting teams down in the bullpen, and they just don't have that kind of bullpen anymore. So we'll see. They picked up Neftali Feliz this week, who got cut from the Brewers. So he's a guy that still throws 96 miles an hour, but has a little trouble with walks this year. Gave up some home runs in Milwaukee, so that got him cut. So maybe that's another reclamation project they can work with. Dayton Moore has done a pretty good job finding guys off the scrap heap and making them work in the bullpen. You may remember Ryan Madsen, who had been out of baseball for like 3 years. They picked him up in 2015, and he was a great reliever for them that year. Ended up getting a nice deal from Oakland out of that. So we'll see with Feliz. Maybe Dayton Moore can be a little creative with his bullpen this year. But that was a part of their problems in April. Their bullpen wasn't very good at all. And luckily, it's come back a little bit in the last month. Pitched a lot better. So I think I still have high hopes for Kelvin Herrera. I think he's got the stuff to be a pretty good closer. And certainly in the setup role, he's been outstanding. I don't think it's anything like mentally that he needs to overcome to become a closer. I think he just needs to rely on his fastball a little bit more and trust his stuff, and he'll have some better results.
Well, I think I may have a guy for you that could be helpful in that bullpen, and that's here with the New York Mets, and that's Addison Reed. Addison Reed is a guy who can be somewhat inconsistent. I mean, he will drive you crazy with putting guys on base and walking guys a little bit, not just walking guys, just giving up a lot of base hits. He's given up 39 base hits in 38 innings this year, but has only given up 12 earned runs. He's got an ERA of 2.82. He has 11 saves this year. He's been in a unique situation in New York because of the loss of Jerry Osmelia from both the suspension and then an injury after that. So he's been the Mets closer this year, and they're talking about shopping Addison Reed come July 31st, because right now the Mets are so far out of it, like 15 games out of first place or whatever it is now. It's 11 games out of first place in the East. So that could be a piece that could be available to somebody like Kansas City or anybody else who's looking for bullpen help that could bolster that unit up.
Yeah, and we're familiar with him from the 2015 World Series, and yeah, I think that's the kind of reliever they could really use, and we'll have to see if there's a lot of teams asking for him, then it could drive the Royals out of the market. But it's interesting. Just a couple of weeks ago, it seemed like we were hearing trade rumors about Mike Moustakas going to the Mets because the Mets were in it and the Royals weren't. And how quickly things turn now. A couple weeks later, it sounds like the Mets are ready for a fire sale, and the Royals may be one of the buyers. So it's just kind of funny how baseball changes so quickly like that. But yeah, the Mets will certainly have some assets, I think, that could interest the Royals. I just question how much the Royals can really afford to give up in any kind of trade. And with so many buyers out there, I mean, so many teams are in it in the American League right now. It just seems like if it's going to be like a seller's market, they can pretty much ask for pretty good prospects for even a guy like Addison Reed, who has had, like you said, has had a pretty good season this year, and they're going to get a pretty good package for him if he continues to pitch like that. So yeah, it would be nice to add him, I think, for the Royals, but it's just a matter of what do they have to give up that the Mets are going to want.
Yeah, that's going to be the question, and I think from the Mets standpoint, they're looking to load up on prospects. I don't know if they're looking to load up on top prospects because they do have a pretty good pool as it is in their minor league system. I mean, so much so that there are a lot of fans here in New York just complaining, saying they want to see guys like Ahmed Rosario, Dominic Smith up at the major league level already. And Mets are saying, no, those guys aren't ready yet. We'll see what happens come the end of July. Certainly by that point when the trade deadline is over and the Mets are officially accepting they're out of it, we'll see at that point. But it'll be interesting to see what they're willing to accept as far as minor league prospects. If they're willing to accept low level prospects, if they want some top prospects, I don't know if they're going to be able to get that, considering some of the guys that they have this year are having some down years. We'll see, but it'll be a very interesting trade market nonetheless.
Yeah, and you can tell a lot about what the general manager thinks the direction of the franchise is by what kind of prospects he gets. I mean, if it's guys that are in low A ball, you can tell that it's probably going to be a long rebuilding process. Whereas if he gets guys that are major league ready, then they're probably going to try to reload for next year and try it again. I would expect with the Mets, with the kind of guys they have, that great young pitching staff, I think they probably will end up looking for guys close to the major leagues that they can reload for 2018 with. But yeah, it'll be an interesting trade market just because there are so many teams in it still, and like I said, I think it's going to be a seller's market with a lot of teams, with a few teams that are out of it kind of dictating what happens. The Mets are certainly going to be in a good position for that. The White Sox, I think, will be in a good position for that with some of the names they have. The A's, always very creative trade partners. So, yeah, I think it's going to be kind of a wild July trade deadline this year.
Yeah. Let's talk about this NL Central here before we wrap this up. This division right now it looks like it's going to be wild right through the summer here, going into September in the stretch run. And here are some interesting stats for you, Max. Just head to head, Kansas City against Minnesota this year. Kansas City is 1-7. Kansas City against Cleveland. Kansas City is 5-4. And just for the sake of argument, Minnesota against Cleveland. Cleveland is actually, even though they did get swept this weekend by the Twins, Cleveland is 8-5. Believe it or not, they played 13 games already against each other. 8-5 against Minnesota. So it's going to be very tight, very, very tight. It's been tight in this division. It's really a three-dog race right now.
Yeah, it's interesting, too, because the Royals really struggled against the Indians last year, but they just dominated the Twins and the White Sox. This year, it's been a flip. It's really struggled against the Twins and the White Sox, and it's the Indians they played well against. So, yeah, it's interesting. I think everyone expected the Indians to just kind of run away with the division, and if they had, I don't think you'd be talking about the Royals being in the race or not being sellers anymore, because even if they were 500, because they'd be so far back. So I think the fact that the division has been so kind of mediocre so far, and no one's really taken firm hold of the division, has kind of given the Royals an opportunity, and they need to make the most of that opportunity, because the Indians are starting to play a little bit better, and the Royals need to kind of match them. I mean, the easy part is getting back to 500. The hard part is going from 500 to 90 wins, whatever it takes to win the division. So they still got a lot of work ahead of them. But the good thing is, they are playing well against the Indians, and that's certainly the team you want to play well against, and we'll have to see how they do in the future. The Indians do have a lot of talent on paper, and they have the track record from last year as a defending league champs to kind of make that push, and we'll have to see. But the Royals have been there before too, so I don't think they're a team that's scared of the Indians, and especially with the way they played against them, I think they feel like they can match up head to head. So yeah, there's an opportunity there, and the Twins are in it too. I think they played a lot better than people thought with their young guys, and when you have young players like that are hungry, I think you always have to worry about that. And the Indians, they still got a chip on their shoulder because they didn't win it last year. They blew a 3-1 lead, and they kind of remind me of the Royals a little bit when the Royals went to the 2014 World Series and lost in Game 7, and I think they used that as a chip on their shoulder to kind of take it the next year all the way, which they did in 2015. So the Indians, I think, are certainly capable of doing that. But we'll have to see. I think you're right. We're due for a really good race, and the Royals have an opportunity there that I think they need to take advantage of.
Yeah, I agree with you. I agree with you 100%. And you take a look at this Minnesota Twins team. I mean, I'll be honest. I was surprised at the start they had this year, and I'm surprised even to this day that they're still right now over 500 Minnesota and in first place. But they just have guys that are just playing terrific baseball. Miguel Sanu, right up there, one of the league leaders in home runs and RBIs, 18 home runs, 52 RBIs. Brian Dozier, 13 home runs this year. He had 42 home runs last year, and nobody paid attention because Minnesota wasn't very good at all last year. But, man, these guys they can hit the ball out of the ballpark. They are not a great average team, but they have a lot of power in the middle of that order with Sano, with Rosario, with Dozier, and even though he's older now, Joe Mauer.
Yeah, we certainly noticed Brian Dozier last year because I think he hit about 25 of those 40 home runs against the Royals. It seems like he was just a beast against the Royals last year. Yeah, but the Twins are kind of interesting because they're a young team. The thing I've noticed with them is that they've gone from perhaps one of the worst teams on defense to one of the best. And that's even with Sano at third base, he's pretty terrible at third base. But the rest of the field, they've gotten a lot better on defense, which has helped them out. What helped out their pitching staff a lot because their pitching staff, had a lot of problems last year. And I think just getting them to be okay this year has been a huge, huge help for them. So, especially with their offense, because their offense can score some runs. We know they can mash the ball. So to get some just decent pitching, I think has helped them out a lot. So we'll have to see. I don't know if they're in it for the long run. 2015, I think it was, a lot of people didn't think they would be in it till the end, and they ended up being contenders till late September, I think, in the wild card race. So they were kind of surprising that year. So I think, they're a team that can hang around. They've always been kind of a pesky franchise that's kind of hard to put away. So, when you have young guys like that are talented, the sky's the limit, really. I mean, you don't know exactly what you have with a lot of these guys. Sano could be the next great thing. And Byron Buxton, we still haven't really seen him reach his potential yet. And Jose Barrios has been a nice find in the pitching rotation. So they've got some guys that are intriguing, and I'm not going to take them lightly at all. I think they're a team that could absolutely take this division if the Indians continue to struggle and the Royals don't have the pieces to do it this year. The Twins could absolutely surprise a lot of people and make the playoffs this year.
Yeah, and you brought up the fielding percentage. I just looked it up, and last year they had 126 errors in the whole season. This year, almost halfway through 73 games, you know how many errors they have? Just 31. That's it. That's incredible.
Wow.
That's incredible.
Yeah,
Only
last year they were just comedy of
season.
errors out there. Yeah, they were just kind of a laughable team last year on defense, and this year when they played the Royals, and you could just tell the difference. I mean, they look a lot more competent out there, a lot, getting the balls that they weren't getting to last year, and they just look like a much improved team on defense.
Yeah, they do, and plus you have Irvin Santana, reversing the aging process a little bit. Right now, 10-4, 2.80 ERA. He's led that team right now this year, and they really don't have a really set rotation. The Twins, as far as guys who stand out, but man, they're just doing just enough, and they're making enough of their opportunities to win these games. And that was a huge series for them this weekend, sweeping Cleveland. Yeah,
and they'll be tested like that all year, I think. And in a lot of ways, they're kind of doing the formula the Royals did a couple of years ago. Taking a group of guys that are all good prospects and kind of bringing them up together. And now you're seeing the fruits of that with Sano and Dozier and Buxton, and so and it's good they have some good veterans in that clubhouse too, like Joe Mauer. But I think that's kind of the formula small markets need to do. They need to get kind of develop guys together, bring them all up together, and then they all kind of learn how to win together. And of course, the Royals actually learned that from the Twins of the early 2000s when they had Torrey Hunter and Michael Kadire and Mauer and a number of other guys. So it's kind of the formula small market teams need to take, and so it wouldn't surprise me at all if the Twins as a kind of rising franchise that's going to be in October's for the next couple of years.
Could happen, and you know what? For all we know, the way things are going right now in the American League, there's a very good chance. There's still a chance you can end up with two teams out of the Central in the playoffs. I mean, the wild card is very wide open. I know right now you have Boston and Tampa Bay right now in the front of that wild card, but hey, look, things can change. Most definitely, Boston's lost a couple in a row. Tampa Bay's lost a couple in a row. Not sure if I trust either Texas or LA, the Anaheim Angels right now in that wild card race. So there's a chance you could still end up with a couple of teams out of the Central going into the playoffs this year.
Yeah, like the American League just seems pretty wide open. I think Houston, is still the class of the league right now, and just because they've gotten off such a great start, and they have just an amazing amount of talent. But in a short series in October, anything can happen. The Royals in 2014 went up against a 99-win Angels team that had Mike Trout and a really good rotation with C.J. Wilson, and they swept them. They just absolutely dominated in that series, and that spurred their magical run. And that's why we love baseball, right? Because anything can happen. Teams blow 3-1 leads. The underdog wins sometimes, and that's why we follow sports. So I think it's going to be a fun summer. The Central teams could absolutely take it, and certainly we know Cleveland's been there before. The Royals have been there before, so they're teams that know how to do what it takes to make it to October, and they're not going to be intimidated. And I think it's going to be a lot of fun to watch, and it's good to see there's going to be a really good division race in the Central. I think that makes baseball a lot more fun than one team pulling away and just running away with it. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad we have meaningful baseball in Kansas City after so many years of just our team being out of it by the second week of April. So I'm just glad to be a part of it.
They're going to be in it right through the end of this season. I can tell you right now, it's going to be a fun race right there in the Central Division, Max. Max, before I let you go, what else you got coming up on Royals Review?
Well, we're getting ready for the All-Star game, so I think the Royals are going to have. Looks like Eric Hosmer and Salvador Perez are leading the voting at their position, so it looks like we'll have two starters. Jason Vargas looks like a good bet. Maybe Mike Moustakas, maybe Lorenzo Cain, we'll see. But certainly getting at least three players in the All-Star game would be a pretty big deal. So, we're getting excited for that. And just, getting ready for the July stretch. These next 5 weeks I think are critical for this team. If we can play even better and then maybe even take over first place, then maybe you can even talk about us being buyers and going for Addison Reed or going for some of these starting pitchers that are out there. If they just kind of hover around 500, then maybe they just kind of sit tight. And if they really fall out of it, they fall 10 games back, maybe we start picking up those seller talks, being sellers again. But it's going to be a critical 5 weeks, and we'll see if they can continue this good momentum they have.
We'll see. Max, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, man, for coming on.
Thanks a lot. I appreciate it.
All right, I'll talk to you soon. Folks, that was Max Rieper of Royals Review. Kansas State right in the thick of the things here, folks, in the AL Central, as they are at 37-37. And again, you take a look at that division, it's tight. You got Minnesota, the Twins at 39-34. The Indians a half game back after getting swept by the Twins this weekend at 39-35. And then Kansas City right behind them at 37-37. Three teams all battling in the top of that division. And Minnesota's the real deal. And as like we talked about, they may not have the starting pitching that stands out outside Irvin Santana, but they can hit the ball as good as anybody in this league, and they got a lot of power in that lineup. So they're going to be in this thing for the long haul. They have not shown any sign, the Minnesota Twins, of slowing down this year. And Cleveland, Cleveland at the start of this year, we talked about them, and we talked about their pitching. We talked about the players they had returning from the World Series team last year. This has been a bit of a disappointing year for the Indians, I think, in a lot of ways. To be only 4 games over 500 and not running away with this division the way a lot of people thought they would this year. Outside of Carlos Carrasco, their pitching hasn't exactly lived up to what you would expect. I mean, yes, Corey Kluber is still a guy you would want to put out there every fifth day, especially in a big spot, and he's had a good year. But 6-2, a 3.38 ERA, it's not what you expected from Corey Kluber this year, but maybe the biggest disappointments being Salazar, Bauer, and Tomlin have had disappointing years this year for Cleveland out of that rotation. We'll see if they can turn it around. Of course, they still have these are still guys that you would expect and take any day of the week in a big spot and in a big playoff game. We'll see if the Indians can turn it around towards the second half of the year. And, of course, Kansas City, as we've discussed for the last hour now, a team that is really found a way to turn things around here after a horrible start to the year. They were 10 games under 500 on May the 7th. They are 27-17 since. They've gotten good starting pitching, especially from Jason Vargas, something that no one really ever expected. And a team that, look, they've always had the talent. Always have had the talent. Guys like Hosmer, Moustakas, Lorenzo Cain, of course, Salvador Perez, who, let's be honest, could be the MVP of this team. They have the talent and they have the experience to go out there and get it done. So the Central in the American League is going to be fascinating to watch this season as we move along towards July, towards the All-Star break, and obviously the trade deadline on July the 31st. So, folks, really want to thank you all for tuning in and listening. Remember to follow us on the social media at OpenMicNJ on Twitter, Facebook.com/OpenMicProgram, and, of course, follow us on the Sports Talk Nation. That's Sports Talk Nation on YouTube.com. Folks, take care. Talk to you next time. We will be back on Friday with the show. So keep tuned to the social media, and we'll get you ready on Friday at 6 Eastern right here on the Open Mic program. Take care, everybody. Have a great week. Talk to you next time.